The crystal spires of Nexus Prime gleamed against the purple nebula backdrop as thousands of ships from across the galaxy descended toward the ceremonial platform. Admiral Ketvar of the Zenthri Empire adjusted his ceremonial sash, watching through the viewport as delegates from 47 species converged for the most significant celebration in galactic history. Today marked 50 years since the last human transmission had been detected from Earth. "Magnificent turnout," commented Ambassador Yilthara, her insectoid features clicking with satisfaction. Even the isolationist Corvani sent representatives. Ketvar nodded, his reptilian eyes reflecting the distant stars. The Galactic Council had spent centuries debating what to do about humanity. They were too unpredictable, too aggressive, too willing to fight impossible odds. When humans had refused the Council's generous offer of supervised relocation to designated worlds, the decision had been unanimous. Earth's silence proved the effectiveness of the coordinated blockade and systematic dismantling of their colonies. The ceremony began with the traditional lament of the fallen, though few truly mourned humanity's passing. Speaker Mordun, ancient beyond measure, raised his crystalline arms to address the assembled delegates. His voice resonated through quantum harmonics, reaching every mind present. "We gather not in celebration of death, but in recognition of necessity," Mordun intoned. The humans possessed remarkable qualities: courage, ingenuity, adaptability. But they lacked wisdom. They refused to accept their place in the greater order. Ketvar remembered the early encounters with human ships. Their vessels were crude compared to Zenthri engineering, held together with primitive alloys and driven by chemical propulsion. Yet they had somehow turned 3 separate first contact scenarios into military victories, using tactics that defied conventional warfare. The humans had studied their enemies with terrifying efficiency, adapting faster than any species on record. Their expansion was too rapid, continued Mordun. Their colonies spread like a virus, consuming resources without regard for established territorial boundaries. They showed no respect for the ancient protocols that maintained galactic peace. The assembled delegates murmured agreement. The ethereal collective had lost 2 mining worlds to human terraforming projects. The hive mind clusters reported disrupted breeding cycles due to human electromagnetic emissions. Even the peaceful Verdani had complained about human agricultural techniques, contaminating neighboring star systems. Ambassador Yilthara leaned closer to Ketvar. "Do you ever wonder if we acted too hastily? Their technological advancement in such a short time was remarkable." Ketvar's throat sacs inflated with dismissive air. "Remarkable but dangerous. They would have consumed everything given enough time. We gave them opportunities to integrate peacefully." That was partially true. The Council had offered humanity junior membership, with restricted territorial rights and mandatory technological oversight. The humans had responded by declaring independence from all galactic authority and announcing their intention to explore beyond Council space. Their final diplomatic message had been disturbingly simple. "We decline your offer. We'll make our own way." The blockade had begun immediately. Human trade routes were severed, their communication networks jammed, their colony supply lines cut. The Council expected quick surrender once humans realized their isolation. Instead, the humans had fought back with increasingly desperate innovation. Their final stand was almost admirable, Yilthara mused. That last battle at Proxima Centauri, they managed to destroy a full Zenthri battlecruiser with converted cargo hauler. Ketvar suppressed a shudder. He had been aboard the sister ship, watching as humans rigged their civilian vessel with every explosive device they could find. The explosion had been visible from 3 star systems away. 20,000 Zenthri warriors lost to a handful of humans who refused to surrender. But that was 50 years ago. The galaxy had been silent of human voices ever since. Speaker Mordun's voice rose to its crescendo. "Today we honor not conquest, but preservation. We have preserved the peace, protected the established order, and ensured that no species again threatens the stability we have built over millennia." A ceremonial flame was lit, its light reflecting off the assembled fleet. Each ship represented a species that had contributed to humanity's containment. The Zenthri had provided military force. The ethereal collective had supplied the communication jamming technology, and the hive minds had coordinated the systematic tracking of human refugees. "Let this flame burn as a reminder," Mordun declared. "Let it represent the light of civilization, protect it from the chaos that would consume it." The delegates began their traditional response chant, voices joining in harmonic celebration. But as the sound reached its peak, something impossible happened. The ceremonial flame flickered, not from wind or mechanical failure, but from electromagnetic interference. Every communication system in the assembled fleet activated simultaneously. Warning lights flashed across 1,000 bridge displays. The quantum harmonics of the celebration were overwhelmed by a signal that cut through every jamming frequency, every defensive protocol, every barrier the Council had erected. The voice that emerged from the speakers was distinctly human, calm and measured, with an underlying tone that made every delegate's survival instinct scream in alarm. "This is Admiral Sarah Chun of the Human Expeditionary Fleet, flagship designation Endurance. We have been monitoring your celebration with great interest." The assembled delegates fell silent. Several species representatives immediately began calculating jump coordinates for emergency retreat. Others activated defensive systems, unsure whether this was a recording or an active transmission. 50 years, the voice continued, and there was something almost amused in its tone. 50 years you've been celebrating our extinction. We appreciate the enthusiasm, but we're afraid your reports have been greatly exaggerated. Chaos erupted across the ceremonial platform as the human transmission continued. Emergency protocols activated throughout the assembled fleet, but the signal penetrated every defensive barrier as if they were tissue paper. Admiral Kethvar watched his tactical display with growing horror as his sensors registered something that shouldn't exist, a massive energy signature approaching from the outer system. "Impossible," breathed Ambassador Yiltara, her compound eyes reflecting the flashing warning lights. "Our long-range sensors show nothing. How can there be a ship we cannot detect?" Speaker Mordun's ancient crystalline form pulsed with agitation. The quantum harmonics that allowed him to communicate across species barriers were being disrupted by the human signal. When he finally managed to speak, his voice carried none of its usual authority. This must be some kind of recording. A delayed transmission from before the final blockade. But even as he spoke, the words rang hollow. The human voice was responding to their celebration in real time, referencing specific details from today's ceremony. Admiral Chen's next words confirmed their worst fears. "We particularly enjoyed Speaker Mordun's description of human expansion as virus-like. It shows a fundamental misunderstanding of our species that explains why your containment strategy failed so spectacularly." The fleet's collective sensor array finally registered the approaching signature. What they saw defied everything they understood about physics and engineering. The human vessel was enormous, easily 3 times the size of the largest Zenthri dreadnought. Its hull configuration was unlike anything in the galactic databases, angular and predatory, with energy readings that suggested power generation beyond current technological frameworks. Kethvar activated his private communication channel to the Zenthri High Command. "This is Admiral Kethvar. We have a Code Omega situation. Request immediate reinforcement from the home fleet." The response was immediate and terrifying. "Admiral, this is Command. We are detecting similar signatures approaching 7 of our core worlds. These vessels appear without warning, bypassing all early warning systems. What is your situation?" Before Kethvar could respond, Admiral Chen's voice returned, and this time it carried an edge of cold satisfaction. "You seem surprised by our survival. Perhaps we should explain what you accomplished with your blockade." The human flagship continued its approach, its hull becoming visible to the naked eye as it emerged from the stellar background. The ship's design was unsettling. Organic curves merged with geometric precision, suggesting a fundamental shift in human engineering philosophy. Weapon ports lined its hull like the eyes of some vast predator. "You isolated us," Chin continued, her voice now broadcasting from speakers throughout the assembled fleet. "You cut us off from the galaxy, forced us to depend only on ourselves. You eliminated our access to established trade routes, forcing us to develop our own. You jammed our communications, so we learned to communicate in ways you never anticipated." The implications were staggering. The Council had assumed that isolation would weaken humanity. force them to turn inward, and eventually collapse from resource depletion. Instead, they had apparently used the time to develop technologies that made the galactic norm obsolete. Ambassador Yilthara's survival instincts finally overcame her diplomatic training. We need to evacuate immediately. This is not a situation our current forces can handle. But escape was already impossible. The human flagship had positioned itself between the ceremonial platform and the only viable jump point. Worse, sensors were now detecting additional signatures, smaller vessels that had somehow infiltrated the assembled fleet's formation without triggering any alarms. You were correct about one thing, Chun continued. Humans do adapt quickly. 50 years of isolation taught us valuable lessons about self-sufficiency. We learned to build without depending on galactic supply chains. We learned to fight without relying on established military doctrine. Most importantly, we learned to think beyond the limitations you tried to impose. Kethvar studied the tactical display with growing dread. The human vessels weren't just technologically superior. They were demonstrating strategic thinking that surpassed anything in the Council's military archives. They had somehow tracked the ceremonial gathering, infiltrated the assembled fleet, and positioned themselves for maximum psychological impact. Your mistake, Admiral Chen's voice continued, was assuming that humanity would simply accept extinction. You calculated our response based on known galactic species' behavior patterns. But humans have never been particularly concerned with following established patterns. The flagship's communication array activated, projecting a holographic display that every ship in the fleet could see. The image showed a three-dimensional map of the galaxy, with thousands of points of light marking human presence across previously unexplored regions. While you were celebrating our death, we were building, not just ships or weapons, but entire civilizations in regions you never thought to explore. We went beyond the established boundaries of galactic civilization and made contact with species you never knew existed. The display shifted, showing massive construction projects in deep space, orbital cities around uninhabited worlds, and what appeared to be an entirely new type of faster-than-light communication network. The scope was breathtaking. Humanity hadn't just survived the blockade. They had used it as an opportunity to leap ahead of galactic civilization by several centuries. We want to thank you for the motivation, Chin said, and there was definite amusement in her voice now. Without your intervention, we might have been content to remain a minor species on the periphery of galactic politics. Instead, you forced us to become something more. Several delegates were now openly panicking. The ethereal collective's representatives were attempting to phase shift their vessel out of normal space, but something was interfering with their quantum matrix. The hive mind clusters were frantically trying to coordinate an emergency response, but their communication links were being selectively disrupted. You're jamming our systems. Kethvar transmitted on all frequencies. This is an act of war. War. Chen's response was immediate. Admiral, we're not here to start a war. We're here to end one. The war you started 50 years ago when you decided that humanity had no right to exist freely in this galaxy. The human flagship's weapon systems powered up with a harmonious hum that every ship in the fleet could hear through their hull resonance. The energy signatures were unlike anything in the galactic databases, not plasma cannons or particle beams, but something that seemed to manipulate space-time itself. You have two choices, Admiral Chen announced. You can surrender peacefully and accept the new reality of galactic politics, or you can resist and learn why isolating humanity was the single greatest strategic error in galactic history. The silence that followed Admiral Chen's ultimatum was deafening. Across the assembled fleet, species that had dominated galactic politics for millennia found themselves facing an opponent they had gravely underestimated. The human flagship's weapons remained powered but not yet aimed, a gesture that somehow made the threat more terrifying than direct aggression. Speaker Mordun's crystalline form pulsed with rapid calculations. His ancient mind, which had witnessed the rise and fall of dozens of civilizations, struggled to process the implications of humanity's return. Admiral Chun, he transmitted, his quantum harmonics carefully modulated to project calm authority. Perhaps we can discuss this situation rationally. The Council acted within established galactic law. Established galactic law. Chen's voice carried a note of dark amusement. The same law that grants the Council authority to determine which species deserve to exist? We've had 50 years to study your legal framework. Speaker, we found it interesting that every law seems designed to preserve the status quo for existing Council members. The human flagship sensors swept across the assembled fleet with uncomfortable intensity. Whatever scanning technology they were using penetrated every defensive barrier, analyzing ship compositions, crew numbers, and weapon capabilities with surgical precision. During our isolation, Chin continued, we had time to examine the Council's history. The Zarathi Confederation, eliminated 3,000 years ago for aggressive expansion. The Veltar Republic, dissolved 2 millennia ago for failure to maintain proper resource allocation. The Quantum Collective, absorbed into the Ethereal Collective after being declared technologically unstable. Each example sent ripples of unease through the assembled delegates. Those were classified historical records, supposedly destroyed to prevent cultural contamination. How had humanity accessed information that even most council members had never seen? Ambassador Yilthara's legs clicked nervously against her ship's deck. The Zarathi were genuinely dangerous. They were consuming entire star systems. No, Chen's response was immediate and precise. They were developing technology that would have made them independent of council control, just like the Veltar Republic was developing economic systems that bypassed council trade regulations. And the Quantum Collective was exploring dimensional physics that threatened the Ethereal Collective's monopoly on space-time manipulation. The accusations hung in the void between ships, each one backed by evidence that shouldn't exist. The human flagship's display screens activated again, showing detailed records of council deliberations, classified military operations, and secret agreements between species. The information was devastating. Proof that the council had systematically eliminated any species that threatened their collective dominance. You see, Chin continued, we learned something important during our exile. The galaxy is much larger than you've told anyone. There are entire regions of space beyond your influence, civilizations that have never heard of the Galactic Council. We spent 50 years building relationships with them. The display shifted to show star maps that extended far beyond Council space. Hundreds of species markers appeared, representing civilizations that had remained hidden from or ignored by the Council's expansion. The scope was staggering. Humanity had apparently contacted more alien species in 50 years than the Council had encountered in millennia. Admiral Kethvar's tactical training finally overcame his shock. Even if this is true, you're still only one species. The Council commands the resources of 47 civilizations. 47 civilizations that have grown comfortable with their dominance, Chin replied. 47 species that haven't faced a real military challenge in centuries. 47 cultures that have forgotten what it means to fight for survival. The human flagship's escort vessels finally revealed themselves, decloaking throughout the assembled fleet. They were smaller than the flagship, but no less advanced, their hull configuration suggesting specialization for different combat roles. More disturbing was their positioning. They had somehow infiltrated the fleet's formation so thoroughly that every major council ship was now within optimal firing range. We, on the other hand, have spent 50 years learning to fight, not just with weapons, but with ideas. We've been teaching our new allies about freedom, about the right to exist without council approval. They've been very receptive to these concepts. The implications were catastrophic. If humanity had indeed made contact with hundreds of previously unknown civilizations, the balance of galactic power had shifted dramatically. The Council's authority depended on their monopoly of interstellar civilization. Discovery of vast regions of space beyond their control would shatter their legitimacy. What do you want? Speaker Mordun's voice carried none of its usual authority. The ancient being's calculations were showing probability matrices that defied rational analysis. Justice, Chin replied simply. You attempted to commit genocide against humanity because we refused to accept your authority. That act of aggression created consequences that will reshape galactic civilization. The human flagship's communication array activated again, this time broadcasting on frequencies that reach beyond the assembled fleet. The signal was powerful enough to penetrate galactic space, carrying a message that every populated system would receive within hours. To all species currently under Council authority, Chen's voice now addressed the entire galaxy. You have been living under a lie. You have been told that the Council represents the pinnacle of galactic civilization, that their authority is necessary for peace and prosperity. But peace enforced through the threat of extinction is not peace, it's oppression. The political ramifications were immediate. Across the galaxy, species that had chafed under Council restrictions would receive independent confirmation that alternatives existed. The revelation that the Council had eliminated previous civilizations for refusing compliance would shatter their moral authority. We're offering an alternative, Chin continued. A confederation of free species, united not by fear, but by mutual respect. We spent 50 years developing the infrastructure to support such an organization. We have the technology to defend it and the allies to sustain it. Several Council ships were now attempting to withdraw from the ceremonial platform, but their navigation systems were being selectively disrupted. The humans had demonstrated technological capabilities that made escape impossible without permission. You cannot simply dissolve the established order, Ambassador Yilthra transmitted desperately. The Council has maintained stability for millennia. Without central authority, the galaxy would descend into chaos. The galaxy has been in chaos, Chin replied. You've simply hidden it behind diplomatic protocols and justified aggression. How many species have you absorbed? How many civilizations have you eliminated? How many worlds have you sterilized to maintain your version of order? The human flagship's weapon systems completed their power-up sequence, and the energy signatures became visible to the naked eye. Whatever technology they were using bent space-time around the weapon ports, creating gravitational distortions that interfered with nearby ship structural integrity. You have one final choice, Admiral Chen announced. You can surrender peacefully, accept the dissolution of the Council, and join the new Galactic Confederation as equal members. Or you can resist and discover why humanity's exile has ended with your civilization's Judgment Day. The assembled fleet found themselves facing an impossible decision. Surrender meant abandoning everything they had built over millennia. Resistance meant facing an opponent whose capabilities they couldn't predict or counter. Either choice would end the age of Council dominance forever. The standoff stretched across minutes that felt like hours. Throughout the assembled fleet, species that had ruled the galaxy for millennia struggled with a decision that would determine their survival. The human flagship remained motionless, its weapons power but patient, while smaller human vessels maintained their positions around every major Council ship. Admiral Kethvar's military instincts were screaming conflicting orders. Every tactical analysis suggested that resistance was futile. The humans had demonstrated technological superiority and strategic positioning that made victory impossible. Yet surrender meant abandoning everything the Zenthri Empire had built over 3,000 years of expansion. Admiral, his communications officer reported, we're receiving priority transmissions from the home fleet. Similar human vessels have appeared at 7 core worlds. They're not attacking, but they're waiting. The implications were staggering. This wasn't just about the ceremonial fleet. Humanity had simultaneously positioned forces throughout Council space. The level of coordination required suggested intelligence capabilities and strategic planning that surpassed anything in galactic history. Speaker Mordun's crystalline form had dimmed to barely visible levels, his ancient mind processing scenarios that all led to the same conclusion. Admiral Chun, he transmitted, his quantum harmonics carrying exhaustion that spanned millennia. If we were to consider your proposal, what assurances could you provide regarding the treatment of existing Council species? The same assurances you provided humanity 50 years ago, Chin replied. None. The brutal honesty of the response sent shockwaves through the assembled delegates. Several species representatives began transmitting surrender codes, their survival instincts overriding political considerations. But others, particularly the Zenthri and Ethereal Collective, remained defiant. You're bluffing. Admiral Kethvar transmitted. You can't possibly have the forces necessary to control the entire galaxy. Even with advanced technology, you're still limited by numbers and logistics. Are we? Chen's voice carried genuine curiosity. You're thinking in terms of traditional occupation and control. We're not here to rule the galaxy. We're here to liberate it. there's a significant difference. The human flagship's display screens activated once more, showing real-time feeds from across Council space. The images were devastating. Human vessels weren't just positioned at major worlds. They were broadcasting continuously, sharing information about Council activities that had been classified for centuries. Every species in the galaxy is now learning about the Zenthri sterilization protocols, Chun continued. The ethereal collective's dimensional manipulation experiments on unwilling subjects. The hive mind clusters force assimilation programs. The carefully hidden history of civilizations that dare to challenge Council authority. The political damage was irreversible. Even if the Council somehow survived this confrontation, their moral authority was shattered. Species that had accepted Council rule out of respect or fear would now understand the true cost of compliance. "You're destroying everything," Ambassador Yiltara transmitted, her voice carrying genuine anguish. The Council has maintained peace for millennia. Without central authority, the galaxy will fragment into chaos. "The galaxy is already fragmented," Chin replied. "You've simply hidden the fractures behind diplomatic protocols. How many species have considered rebellion, but remain silent out of fear? How many civilizations have been stunted by Council restrictions designed to prevent them from becoming threats?" The human flagship sensors swept across the assembled fleet again, this time with different intent. Instead of analyzing defensive capabilities, they were mapping communication networks, tracking information flow, and identifying key decision-makers among the various species. "We're not interested in conquest," Chin continued. "We're interested in freedom. The freedom to explore, to develop, to make contact with other species without seeking permission from self-appointed guardians. The freedom to exist without justifying our right to survival." Several more Council ships began transmitting surrender codes, but the core military forces remained defiant. The Zenthri battlecruisers powered up their weapon systems, while the Ethereal Collective's vessels began preparing for phase-shift combat. The hive mind clusters activated their swarm protocols, preparing to coordinate mass assault. "So be it." Admiral Chen's voice carried no anger, only resigned determination. "You've chosen to repeat the same mistake you made 50 years ago. You've chosen to underestimate humanity's capacity for adaptation." The human flagship's weapons finally targeted the assembled fleet, but not in the way anyone expected. Instead of conventional energy weapons, they fired something that looked like metallic smoke, thousands of microscopic projectiles that spread throughout the formation faster than any defensive system could track. "Nanobots," Kethvar breathed, watching his tactical display register impacts across every ship in the fleet. "They're using nanobots." But the nanobots weren't attacking ship systems or crew members. Instead, they were infiltrating communication networks, downloading databases, and broadcasting everything they found on frequencies that reached across the galaxy. Every classified document, every secret protocol, every hidden decision was being exposed in real time. "The galaxy deserves to know the truth," Chin explained calmly. "Every species has a right to understand the system they've been living under. Every civilization deserves to make informed decisions about their future." The political devastation was immediate and irreversible. Across Council space, species that had accepted authority without question were learning about decisions made in their name. The revelation that the Council had systematically eliminated civilizations for refusing compliance would trigger independence movements on thousands of worlds. "You're not just destroying the Council," Speaker Mordun transmitted, his voice carrying the weight of millennia. "You're destroying the very concept of galactic civilization." "No," Chin replied. "We're destroying the concept of galactic domination. Civilization will survive, but it will be built on foundations of mutual respect rather than fear." The human flagship's weapon systems powered down, their primary mission accomplished. The nanobots had completed their task, transmitting terabytes of classified information throughout the galaxy. The Council's authority was already collapsing as species after species learned the truth about their supposed protectors. "The war is over," Admiral Chin announced. "Not because we've conquered you, but because we've given the galaxy the information it needs to make its own choices. Some species will choose to maintain their allegiance to the Council. Others will seek independence. A few will join our confederation. All will have the freedom to choose. The assembled fleet found themselves facing a reality they hadn't anticipated. The humans hadn't come to conquer or destroy. They had come to expose the truth and allow the galaxy to decide its own fate. The Council's millennium of dominance was ending not with invasion, but with revelation. What happens now? Ambassador Yilthra asked, her voice carrying confusion of a species that had suddenly lost its place in the galactic order. Now, Chen replied, we find out what the galaxy looks like when every species has the freedom to determine its own destiny. We find out what civilization becomes when it's built on choice rather than coercion. The human flagship began moving away from the ceremonial platform, its escort vessels falling into formation. They had accomplished their mission without firing a single shot in anger. The galaxy would never be the same. 3 months after the revelation at Nexus Prime, the galaxy was transforming in ways no one had predicted. The Human Confederation's headquarters, established in the neutral territory between former Council space and the unexplored regions, buzzed with activity as representatives from hundreds of species arrived to negotiate new relationships. Admiral Sarachin stood in the observation deck of the Endurance, watching as ships from across the galaxy approached the massive space station humanity had constructed. The design was deliberately different from Council architecture, open, welcoming, with transparent sections that allowed visitors to see the inner workings of the facility. The Zenthri delegation just arrived, reported Commander Martinez, Chen's second-in-command. Admiral Ketvar is requesting a private meeting before the General Assembly. Chen nodded, unsurprised. The Zenthri Empire had been among the most resistant to change, but even they couldn't ignore the reality of their situation. 43 of their member species had declared independence within weeks of the information release. The Empire was fragmenting, and Ketvar was seeking a way to salvage what remained of Zenthri influence. Schedule the meeting, Chen replied, but make it clear that any discussion will be recorded and made available to all interested parties. The age of secret diplomacy is over. The transformation hadn't been without cost. Several species had attempted to maintain Council authority through military force, leading to brief but decisive conflicts. The Human Confederation's technological advantages had ended these conflicts quickly, but the psychological impact had been profound. Species that had considered themselves military powers discovered that 50 years of isolation had allowed humanity to leap ahead by centuries. Admiral, Martinez continued, we're also receiving requests from the Ethereal Collective. They want to discuss technology sharing agreements. Chen almost smiled. The Ethereal Collective had been among the most arrogant council members, convinced that their dimensional manipulation technology gave them permanent superiority. The discovery that humanity had developed even more advanced space-time manipulation capabilities had shattered their self-image. Schedule that meeting as well, Chen decided, and make sure our new allies from the Quantum Archipelago are included. They deserve to participate in any discussions about dimensional physics. The Quantum Archipelago was one of the most significant discoveries from humanity's exile period. An entire cluster of civilizations that had developed quantum-based technology thousands of years before the Council's formation. Their assistance had been crucial in developing the Confederation's advanced capabilities. A priority transmission interrupted her thoughts. The communication came from Earth itself, the first official message from humanity's homeworld in 50 years. Chun accepted the transmission with both anticipation and apprehension. Admiral Chun, the familiar voice of Earth's president, filled the observation deck. On behalf of the entire human population, I want to express our gratitude for what you've accomplished. The galaxy is free because of your courage. The galaxy is free because of all of us, Chen replied. Every human who refused to surrender, every species that chose independence over security, every civilization that dared to hope for something better. The report from Earth was encouraging. The home world had survived the Council's blockade, though at significant cost. The population had dropped to barely 2 billion, but they had used the isolation to develop sustainable technologies and philosophical frameworks that would serve as the foundation for humanity's future expansion. We're ready to rejoin galactic civilization, the president continued. But we want to do it right this time. We want to build something that will last. We are building something that will last, Chen assured him. A confederation based on mutual respect rather than fear. A civilization that celebrates diversity rather than demanding conformity. The General Assembly was scheduled to begin within hours. Representatives from over 300 species would gather to discuss the framework for a new galactic order. The discussions would be complex and sometimes heated, but they would be open to all participants. Commander Martinez approached with another update. Admiral, the Veltar Republic has officially reformed. They're sending a delegation to thank us for exposing the truth about their forced dissolution. Chun felt a surge of satisfaction. The Veltar Republic had been one of the Council's most shameful actions, a peaceful civilization destroyed simply because their economic system threatened Council trade monopolies. Their return to independence vindicated every sacrifice humanity had made. There's also news from the outer territories. Martinez continued. The exploration fleets are reporting contact with 17 new civilizations. All of them are interested in joining the Confederation. The galaxy was revealing itself to be far more diverse and complex than anyone had imagined. The Council's authority had been limited to roughly 30% of populated space. The remaining 70% contained civilizations that had developed independently, many with technologies and philosophies that could enrich galactic civilization immeasurably. Admiral. Martinez's voice carried a note of concern. There's one more thing. We're receiving reports of Council remnants attempting to establish a new authority structure. They're calling it the Reform Council and claiming they've learned from past mistakes. Chin wasn't surprised. Power structures that had existed for millennia didn't disappear overnight. Some species would always prefer the security of hierarchy over the uncertainty of freedom. The key was ensuring that they couldn't impose their preferences on others. Monitor the situation, Chun decided, but don't interfere unless they attempt to use force. Everyone has a right to choose their own government, even if that choice is submission to authority. The observation deck's communications array activated, carrying the voice of Speaker Mordun. The ancient being had survived the Council's dissolution and was now attempting to facilitate peaceful transitions across former Council space. Admiral Chin, Mordun's quantum harmonics carried a note of wonder. I have witnessed a rise and fall of civilizations across millennia, but I have never seen transformation on this scale. The galaxy is becoming something unprecedented. The galaxy is becoming what it always should have been, Chin replied. A place where every species can reach its potential without fear of persecution or absorption. The human flagship sensors detected the arrival of the final delegation, representatives from hive mind clusters, who had undergone their own transformation following the revelation. The discovery that individual consciousness was not only possible, but preferable had shattered their collective identity, leading to the emergence of thousands of independent hive mind entities. The assembly is ready to begin, Martinez reported. All major species are represented, and the smaller civilizations have chosen their advocates. Chun took one last look at the gathered fleet. Ships from hundreds of worlds, representing philosophies and technologies that span the spectrum of possibility. The diversity was staggering, but so was the potential for cooperation. Then let's begin, Chin decided. Let's show the galaxy what civilization looks like when it's built on freedom rather than fear. As she walked toward the assembly chamber, Chin reflected on the journey that had brought them here. 50 years of exile, sacrifice, and determination had led to this moment. Humanity had not only survived attempted extinction, but had emerged stronger and wiser. The galaxy would never be the same. But then again, it had never been meant to remain the same. Change was a natural order of things, and the species that adapted would thrive while those that resisted would fade into history. The age of the Council was over. The age of the Confederation was beginning. And for the first time in millennia, every species in the galaxy had the freedom to determine its own destiny. The assembly chamber doors opened, revealing hundreds of delegates from across the galaxy. They represented the future, uncertain, chaotic, but ultimately hopeful. Chin stepped forward to address them, knowing that her words would help shape the next chapter of galactic civilization. Welcome, she began, her voice carrying across the chamber and beyond, to every world that chose to listen. Welcome to the first day of a truly free galaxy.